Engaging with business leaders, as I'm engaging with business leaders, this topic comes up. If you're blessed to be in an industry like defense, medical supply, it has a huge tailwind right now. And your challenges might be more so of how do I just keep up with demand, right? But a lot of us are in industries where we're hearing a little bit of softening. We're hearing some customers are pumping the brakes a little bit. They still plan to buy. I just did some research for one of my clients that has a product that they sell to machine shops, for example. And in general, machine shops are really growing. They had a great year last year. They expect a great year this year, but they also have some constraints. So what we're going to do today is I want this to be interactive. There's going to be times when I'm going to ask you guys questions because I want to know. I want to know what you're seeing. And we're going to use the chat. So we're going to put your answers into the chat and monitor the chat. I'm going to share some insights that I've learned sometimes the hard way. I'm going to share insights from leaders like McKinsey. I'm also going to share some resources, really good books if you want to really improve how your business goes to market. So with that, let's get started. I wrote a book recently called Driving Explosive Growth. And in that book, I talk about one of the best steps to start is understand your current state. So right now, we're seeing all kinds of challenges. We're seeing inflation is impacting a lot of my customers' gross margins. We have a war in Ukraine. We've got the Israel conflict. We've got escalations in the Red Sea. The reason why I mention this is world events actually have an impact on the psyche of our customers. Um, this is an interesting stat. We're breaking a record for the number of worker strikes. It's at an all-time high. I haven't seen a lot of that here in the Cleveland area. I live just south of Cleveland, Ohio. I've lived here most of my life. But we're starting to see like worker unrest, a lot of strikes, and then labor shortages. Quite a few of the people that I help, one of their biggest constraints is labor. They're getting orders, they just can't get them out the door because they either can't find people, they can't find people they can rely on, or they can't find the people with the skills required to do the job. Employee engagement is at an all-time low. I have a lot of theories on why that is, but if you follow this, some of the studies are saying that engagement in a typical organization, only about 20%, 20 to 25% of your team is engaged. So let that sink in for a minute. The vast majority of your people are not engaged. And the real scary number is the people that are disengaged. So just like when we do voice of customer research, we actually do engagement studies to help leaders understand, what percent of my team is engaged, what percent of my team isn't engaged, and why. We got China imports. As I said at the beginning, as people were signing on, I have a lot of experience in plastics. I've been blessed to help. I see a couple people here from flavors and fragrances, food products. But in plastics in particular, we're seeing some disturbing statistics where China companies are dropping products into the United States under the price of some of my clients' costs. So how do we deal with that? And then we're seeing a cash crunch like never before. Quite a lot of smaller businesses have variable loan rates, and as those loan rates go up, they're feeling the cash crunch. We're seeing a shift in buyer behavior and criteria. We're going to talk a little bit about that. How people shop, what are they needing to make buying decisions is changing. And we're also experiencing some layoffs. It started about 8 months ago in the tech sector. I actually used to do training for technology-based companies. And the tech sector is usually one of the first areas to have pretty big layoffs. But even here in the Cleveland area, we saw a very large layoff recently for a chemical manufacturer. Decrease in consumer disposable income. I like to go to the grocery store, believe it or not, because I like to cook. And I can't believe how much things are costing, but wages are not going up with the cost of increases in the inflation. So people are feeling a pinch. We're seeing higher interest rates, depending upon the industry you're in. About a third of my revenue comes from building and supply. So they're having to adapt. People are spending more time with renovation and less time building, for example. Tighter environmental controls. This keeps coming up. It didn't come up nearly as much a couple years ago, but that is part of the conversation now. Post-pandemic new normal. What I often hear is business leaders saying, look, I'm looking to find the new normal. I had a really good handle on my business before the pandemic. The pandemic was pretty brutal. My team rallied. We did a good job. We got through it. But what's the new normal? I really want to get my business back to normal. Well, I hate to be the one to tell you, but you're in the new normal now. It's probably never going to go back exactly like it was. But the good news is I'm going to share some ideas to help you figure out the new normal and actually give your customers a better experience. The other thing that's causing some friction is we have 5 generations in the workforce. I work a lot with senior leadership teams, working on their plan, helping them grow. But we're seeing a strain. We're seeing a strain on culture. We're seeing new generations. We have 5 generations in the workforce today. And some of the new generations are saying, why? Why do we want to do that? Why do I have to do that? And we haven't experienced that before, but we're going to have to adapt. Generations all communicate differently. So the burden is on us to improve our communication, how we communicate, as well as the frequency we communicate. Trust. One of the quickest ways to grow a company is have a team that trusts each other. There's a Harvard professor that wrote a really good book about the speed of growth. And the main part of her book was about if you have a team that trusts each other, you're going to grow a lot quicker than a team that doesn't and has friction. And then execution and alignment. It's not that people don't have a plan, but sometimes they really struggle with execution. They struggle with alignment. I was just helping another company. They're actually in the tractor trailer space. And what we found was of their 7 leaders, 2 of their leaders weren't 100% aligned with the growth plan this year. And there's something called what I refer to as the shadow of the leader. So if the leader's not aligned in the plan, there's a high probability their team isn't aligned in the plan. And then the last thing, the thing that I think is going to sneak up on a lot of companies, I know we're starting to talk about it, but I think we need to give it a little more energy. I just wrote a blog post about it. I have a series of about another 10 blogs about it. It's called The Gray Tsunami. Baby boomers are leaving. They're leaving the workforce with unbelievable numbers. And one of my clients is a pretty large distributor, and we found that 57% of their top performing people are going to retire in the next 5 years. And what's more disturbing is they know things that aren't written down anywhere. So a lot of the efforts that I do with companies is we work on training. So we're being forced to capture some of what those people know intuitively. If you ask them what they know, they can't say it. But if we put them in a situation, they'll gladly share how they've always dealt with it. So that gray tsunami is sneaking up on us. But this is one of those places where you can interact. How did 2024 start out for your business? Is it A, and again, please put it into the chat, is it tracking where you expected? Quite a lot of CEOs went into 2024 very optimistic. If we looked at their sales pipelines, because sometimes we're asked to do pipeline audits, the pipelines look really strong. Some people are saying revenue actually is greater than expected, particularly if you're in like defense, medical supply, oil and gas. Some people are saying, you know what, revenue is a little less than we expected. Not sure why, but we still have hope that we're going to have a really good year. And then the other trend that I'm hearing is revenue and gross profits are a little bit less than what we planned. So put it into the chat. Where are you at? Is it A, B, C, or D? Let me take a look. Oh, good. There's a lot of people that are saying that they're seeing that their revenue is at what they expected, maybe even a little greater. Some people are saying it's a little less, but that's good to know because, again, the whole purpose in putting this on today is I really want to help you guys maybe tweak or update your plans just to ensure that 2024 ends up being a great year for growth. So thank you for participating. What I'm hearing a lot in the people that I serve, which is traditionally manufacturers, is revenue's a little less than expected, and we're seeing a pretty good push on gross profit margins. Inflation's getting to the point again where we're going to have to do a price increase. Accounts that have been with me for any length of time, we've done several price increases over the last couple years just to keep up. And we have to teach the salespeople how to do those, professionally, of course. But again, if you haven't done a price increase in some time, you could be feeling a pinch on your gross profits. I love this quote, race car driver. He says that you can't overtake 15 cars on a sunny day, but you can when it's raining. So what I want you to think about is, from a mindset standpoint, if your competitors are buttoned down the hatches, they believe it's going to be a difficult year, maybe they're doing some layoffs, maybe they've curtailed some of their expenses in advertising, not going to a couple trade shows, reducing their Google ad budgets, you name it, right? There's all kinds of things we can do to reduce prices and costs. But what if we decided we're going to use this slow time to actually accelerate and pass them and grow our market share? And that's really what I want to coach people to do today. I didn't do it, but there was a group that did a survey of CEOs and business owners. And the first question they asked was, it was 6 months ago, how many of you believe that we're going to have a difficult 2024? And back then it was only 76%. Then they asked it again in fourth quarter, and 98% said, we believe we're going to have a difficult year. We believe, there's so much uncertainty. We really just don't even know what we're walking into in 2024. We're going to do the best we can. So of those people, that 98% that believed 2024 is going to be difficult, what percent do you think have a plan? A plan should, the economy grow a little more difficult. A plan should raw material prices continue to climb. Should we start seeing some more supply chain challenges because of what's going on in the Red Sea? What do you think that number is? Is it A, B, C, or D? Just put it into the chat. I'm curious what you think. A, 14%, B, 35%, A, 14%, probably B. Somebody also asked in the chat, is this being recorded? Absolutely. Everybody that signed up, because typically my experience is people invite me to do webinars. About 50% of the people actually show up the day of the webinar, and then 50% watch it at their leisure. So you'll get a copy of this. You'll also get a copy of the PDF of the slides. And then I also have a resource that I'm going to make available to everybody. So yeah, I just want you to enjoy our time together. But the answer, believe it or not, is 14%. Now, what disturbs me about that is 98% believe that we're going to have a little bit of friction in 2024. But they really don't have a plan should it occur. When I coach clients, what I ask is, what are some trigger events that would indicate things are changing? It could be people are starting to pay their bills later. What I highly encourage you to do is figure out 2 or 3 trigger events. Get your senior leadership team together at your Monday meeting and just say, hey, what would be some trigger events that would be an early indication that maybe this year is turning on us a little bit? And then start thinking about what that plan could look like if you start seeing the economy becoming very difficult. What today's all about is let's update your plan. When I talk to business owners, I ask them, do you have a plan? And often what they tell me is, numbers, which is a goal, but not a strategic plan, a one-page plan to grow their business, hit their numbers, hit their profit objectives, their net income, their EBITDA. What they have is a goal. We were 23 million last year. We'd like to be 30 million this year. But they really lack the how and the why and the where. So what we want to do is we want to tune up those plans. If that's you, don't feel bad. A lot of folks need help as they work on their plans. The other challenge is sometimes people tell me, well, I have a plan, but it's so big I can't even send it to you. It's in a binder on my bookshelf. We worked on it 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we had different business environment. So I'm asking everybody to take a look at your plan. Let's make sure we have a plan for today. I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of smart people out there, and I love reading McKinsey's content. And McKinsey actually did a paper on what happened the last time we had a really difficult economic time. 75% of businesses saw a decline in revenue, a decline in profits, but 14% actually accelerated like that race car driver, right? They passed their competitors, and of the 14%, they grew 9%, even when the economy was struggling. So that really was interesting to me. And it's like, okay, I know what I've done in the past to grow no matter what's going on in the economy, but what did they do? And the biggest thing was they had a plan. They had a plan should, the economy get worse. They had a plan that was measuring what matters. And when things weren't working out, they made a strategic pivot and they stayed on plan. So the question is, how will your business be a 14%er this year? No matter what happens in our crazy economy, no matter what happens in world events, how can we stay on point and still hit our key growth objectives and maybe even pass some of our competitors? The first thing is mindset matters. What you believe is what actually will happen. You'll find ways to justify what you believe. I really enjoy how our mindset actually impacts our behaviors. And a thought, by the way, repeated over and over again just becomes a belief, but it doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that it's true. And again, our friends at McKinsey just published a paper this week, and I had to include it. There's a link to it. It's called Achieving Extraordinary Growth, the Myths and Realities from McKinsey. But I've heard these myths, like myth number one, size matters. Only large companies can outperform in uncertain times. Not true. I've been on pretty small companies that saw 20, 30, one of which doubled in terrible economic times. Myth number two, companies must either choose growth or choose profits, but not both. Simply not true. One of the things I often really enjoy doing, particularly with family businesses, is help them get ready for sale. And one of the things that future buyers look at is, how diversified is your business? How has your growth been? And has your gross margins been increasing, staying the same, or decreasing as you grew your revenue? And it is possible to do both. Extraordinary growth is only possible in high growth industries with huge tailwinds. For example, at the beginning, I said, medical supply is booming right now. Defense, unfortunately, is booming right now. But again, you can still grow in your industry, even if you don't have that tailwind of growth. And then the one that really kind of, is hard for me to hear sometimes, and this is when I'm maybe working with a second, third, or fourth generation company, is, look, we're a low growth company. We've always been low growth, 2 to 3% a year. And I don't think we could make the leap into 20 to 30% growth year over year. Okay, that's simply not true. I understand how you can believe that. I understand how you can look at the past, but the past doesn't need to predict your future. And there's all kinds of wonderful tools, resources, books, coaches out there that can help you. So the first thing I recommend is do an MRI on your business. You know, if you were all of a sudden feeling a little tired for the last month, maybe last 60 days, all of a sudden maybe, you know, you just don't have the energy you used to have. I hope you go to a doctor, right? I hope you don't like self-prescribe. And the doctor's going to run a bunch of tests. They're going to run blood tests. They're going to probably, when this happened to me it was in 2020, they had me do a stress test. There's all kinds of different tests, MRIs. I recommend we do an MRI on your business. How strong are our customer relationships? Are our customers satisfied? How strong is our leadership team? Do they have the skills to take us where we want to go? A lot of times, businesses have really strong leadership teams that took them where they're at. But to go, let's say, from 30 million to 100 million, we're going to need to add some new skill sets. Sometimes we can train and coach people up, but sometimes we need to hire them, right? How's your website doing? Sometimes we recommend people do a website audit. You know, are you generating a lot of really good sales qualified leads? What's your bounce rate? What's your SEO rank today compared to your competitors? So there's a lot of things we can do when we run an MRI, but let's get the data. If your business hasn't been in business any length of time, you have a smart team. The only thing that might challenge your team is not having up-to-date data. So once we have the up-to-date data, we can strategically plan on how to grow the business. So I had one client call it opting out of slowing sales, and I'm going to borrow it. So how do we opt out of slowing sales and reduce profits? The number one thing is know your markets and your current trends. We got to make sure we have the right people in the right seats with the right skills. We're seeing a lot of restructuring going on in sales right now. People got pretty used to virtual selling during the pandemic. So we're seeing people really investing in inside sales. And outside sales really becomes more of a technology expert that goes out on site and with diagnostics and making sure the customer has the best experience. Leadership team. Is your leadership team aligned and built based on a foundation of trust? Great book, The Speed of Trust by Covey. I should have probably included it today. But there's a thing called the trust tax. A lot of companies are just not growing as fast as they could because there's a trust tax. There's people in their organizations who just don't trust each other. And when we have that friction, there's a lot of behavior that's non-value added behavior. Do you have a strategic plan? There's a big difference between having a strategic plan and a goal. I'm sure a lot of the people on the call today know that. If you struggle in that area, let's connect afterwards. I'd be happy to coach you on, what a strategic plan should have. Are we all aligned to execute the plan? I was just helping a team not long ago, and we found two of their team members didn't believe in the plan. So they weren't aligned. And when they weren't aligned, they weren't executing the things that we said we needed to do in their departments to help us grow. Are we measuring what matters? We're going to talk about key performance indicators, tracking both leading and lagging indicators. Communication. Just because people are remote, we can't use that as an excuse to have poor communication. Later on, I'm going to talk about a book called Scaling Up. They talk about having huddles and really improving the communication of the meeting, but also the frequency. Coaching and training. What we're finding is there's a lot of people moving into leadership roles because they were really good at whatever they were doing. We see this a lot in sales. They were the top salesperson for the last 2 years. Congratulations, you are now a sales manager. Well, the skills to be a sales manager are a lot different than just being a salesperson. So we got to make sure we give them the coaching and the training that they need. And my biggest advice, if the economy gets a little difficult, which I'm predicting it will, and then fourth quarter, I think it's going to really pick up and we're going to have a really good end of the year, is pivot, don't panic. I'm still helping people that maybe cut too close to the bone during the pandemic, and they're having a hard time climbing out. So again, pivot, don't panic. Today, what I want to spend more time on, though, is knowing your markets and your current trends, making sure your people are in the right seats with the right skills, and we need to focus our salespeople on the right behaviors. As I work with teams, I've yet to find one that doesn't need to make sure their team are focused on the right things. Understanding our customers today. We're going to talk a little bit about how to do that, and then strategy based on customers and market trends of today, kind of like that quote by Vern Harnish. We really can't develop a good strategy if we don't understand our customers. So I hope that helps everybody that's on the call today. Number one, we need to shift sales focus. What started happening during the pandemic, salespeople became very transactional. Depending upon the industry, you might not have seen this, but I look at sales skills kind of like somebody going to the gym. Those sales muscles, if you don't use them, they atrophy. So some teams have been in a transactional mode for the last 24 months, and we need to get them back to selling again. I was just talking to a distributor, and his biggest challenge is getting his salespeople selling again because they got into this behavior of tracking orders. Well, let's look at the next slide. What are salespeople doing? What have they been doing for the last 24 months in some organizations? Very transactional. Taking orders, tracking shipments because of supply chain constraints, maybe communicating shipment delays, negotiating short shipments, and sometimes, and hopefully a lot of you have done this, negotiating price increases that were much needed. Question for you, what percent of time do salespeople spend selling today? What would you guess that number is? Is it A, 10% of the time? Put it into the chat. B, 22% of the time? C, 35% of the time? Or D, 50% of the time? What do you think that number is? Or what have you been experiencing? Better yet. I see C, 35%, B, D. Awesome D, by the way. If they're spending 50% of their time engaged with customers, you should be seeing some wonderful year-over-year growth. B, yeah, the answer actually is 22%. 22% of the time, most salespeople are actually selling. They're engaged with customers, they're asking good questions, they're trying to understand the problems that their customers have, and they're proposing solutions. That's a pretty low number. So just imagine the impact it would have on your bottom line if we could get salespeople spending half their time selling, 60% of their time selling, 70% of their time selling. Because what they're often doing is they're doing research, they're doing social media, they're looking through data. We don't want salespeople to be librarians, right? We want them to have actionable dashboards with quick trends that they can immediately know what they need to do. What should they be doing? They should be working on key account growth plans. If you have some of those A accounts, I recommend every A account has a growth plan. And it's not something that you create in a vacuum. You actually create it with your account. Upselling, cross-selling, in other words, trying to get a greater share of that wallet, that money that your buyer is spending, why not put it in your net income? Something I call precision prospecting. There's a lot of confusion on the term prospecting. Some people think it means basically calling on anybody that could fog a mirror, right? And they get really frustrated. I made 150 phone calls this week and only got 2 meetings. Well, there's a high probability you're not calling on your ideal customers. So what we recommend is let's make a target list of prospects that look a lot like the people who value you most. High probability is they have some similar challenges, but again, we're never going to assume. We're always going to go in and we actually teach people in our training how to ask those questions to confirm some of the challenges that they're facing, and then we can propose some solutions. And then building relationships. Build a matrix of relationships at your key accounts, as well as some of your prospects. One challenge that I often see is people have like one relationship at a customer. And the trouble is that's often with a buyer, but often the buyer yes, they cut the order, but there might be an engineer involved, there might be quality involved, safety, the CFO. Today, there's as many as 6 people involved in key decisions for corporations. So the burden is on sales to understand who they are and also make sure and start building a relationship with them before you need it. So we're going to create those relationship matrix with customers and prospects, understand their customers' goals and challenges. One of my new clients, we're going through a series of training right now. And when I do training, I actually make them like try to apply it. And they're asking their customers, what are some of your goals and challenges? And we're getting some really strong, actionable insights. Selling new products and services, launching new products. I see my friend and mentor in launching products and services. Dave Daniels is on the call. He's got a book coming out really soon. I can't tell you how frustrated some manufacturers are. They come out with a new product, a new service. They did the ROI for the investment, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't launch well. We've got to get salespeople prepared for that product launch. Growing market share and selling new accounts. Again, some of the people I help are actually preparing for a sale. Gets back to that whole gray tsunami. We find a lot of business owners had planned to leave the business to their children, and the children don't want to have anything to do with it. So my role now becomes, how do we get them an unfair multiple for their business? So we got to diversify, we got to sell new accounts, we got to sell new markets. And then training customers and distributors. A lot of our manufacturers work through channel partners, distributors, and they're going through a cycle of a lot of change with employment. And the burden is on us to keep those salespeople that are representing us trained. And the burden is on us to make sure they understand our value proposition. Here's another question for you. Closing the business. What percent of salespeople struggle with closing? I have an unfair advantage. I invested in a lot of different assessments so I could help my customers. And I know the number because I took an average of all the customers I've helped. And, closing skills consistently becomes a challenge for a lot of salespeople. Let's see, D, 67%, somebody guessed. That's a big number. B, 36%. But what we're going to do to keep this flowing is, the number is actually 67%. And the first question a CEO hears is, wait a minute, let me get this straight. I've invested in the marketing. My salesperson booked the flight, they went out, they entertained, they did a presentation. My engineers spent time on this quote and they never asked for the order. What's going on? Well, in most cases, it's because they were never taught closing skills. There are very specific closing skills that are very professional. They don't feel salesy, right? But the people who don't ask for the order are so worried usually about the relationship that they don't ask for the order. When we assess them, we actually see, in how they answer the questions that they honestly believe if they send a quote, the customer will buy when they're ready. That's simply not what I teach. The burden is on us to create urgency, and the burden is on us to ask for the order, but in a professional way. So the question for you, this actually came out of a talk I did in Denver not too long ago. We had about 250 CEOs, CFOs, chief revenue officers, and I asked the question, does your sales team have the skills, motivations, and beliefs to execute your 2024 plan? I said, let's see a show of hands. 100%. 100% of you believe your team is aligned, they have the skills, they're really going to rock it in 2024. Not one hand went up. I expected a couple, but not one hand went up. I said, okay, 70%. 70% of your salespeople have the skills. 1 or 2 hands went up. So I kept going down the line, 50%, more hands went up. But most of the hands were raised when we got to like 25 to 30%. So let me get this straight. 98% of you believe 2024 might have some difficult economic times. You have an aggressive growth plan. Quite a few of my clients want to grow 20 to 30% this year. And you know right now that 70 to 80% of your team don't have the skills, motivations, and beliefs to execute that plan. So what's our plan? What are we going to do to get them ready? Right? Well, the good news is you don't have to guess. Like I said, I'm really blessed. I have all kinds of different tools and assessments. And this is one we did for a team. They had 69 salespeople. And it gives me a snapshot. It gives me a lot of data. My goodness, the report's like 124 pages by company. But real quick, they got a team of hunters, which is awesome. Most companies would kill for that, right? But they need a little bit of help in consultative selling, so they're chasing cars, but when they catch them, they really might not understand how to have a really good conversation. They need help with qualifying. They believe that every time they talk to somebody, it could turn into something, right? So they keep chasing business that maybe they should have disqualified, but look at closing skills, 20th percentile. Again, just a tremendous opportunity. And when I worked for Timken, what they taught us was assess and then prescribe training. The new generation of people coming up through organizations don't want to take something off the shelf. What they want is something that feels custom to them. So when we assess and then train, we can do that. And then we can use data, transaction data, to help us drive strategic growth. I like to say there's dollars in your data if you know where to look. Things like, who are in your top 10 accounts this year? Who were in your top 10 accounts 2 years ago? Has anybody dropped off? Is there a new product or service that's now in your top 10 that wasn't even there a year ago? How many inactive customers do you have? What are we doing to nurture those and bring them back? What's the product mix? As I said, a lot of my clients sell through distribution and channel partners. And we can do the data analysis. It's like, oh, interesting. If people buy this particular coupling, they typically buy this hose, they buy hydraulic fluid, and then we can go into our accounts and say, interesting, I see you're buying the following items, but most people also buy, these items that go along with it. Customers value that they want to give their customer the best experience. So we need to use data to help our customers do that. Are we making enough profit? I've yet to have somebody tell me they're crushing it on profit right now. Well, the good news is there are data-driven tools to help us figure out if we're making enough money and if we have the right pricing. I was really blessed. I worked for a strategic pricing company for a couple of years, and I discovered something called the whale curve, and it's pretty powerful. What you do is you look at your sales, you look at your costs, you look at your margins, but then you add in the cost of sale. And that's when the landscape really changes. Typically, about 20% of your customers represent 200% of your profits. And that's usually when somebody says, Mark, I can tell you're a sales guy. Your numbers don't add up, but just hang with me here. 60% of the orders that you're filling right now, people you're serving, are break even when you add in the cost of sale. And then 20% of the people you're servicing, shipping every day are profit leakers. You're actually losing money every time you engage with them. As I told a client recently, they'd be better off putting a $5 bill in a box and shipping it than the way they've been servicing this particular account. So the good news is we can get a lot of insights from those top 20%. Who are they? What are they valuing? How do we find more people like them? The 20% that are losing money, there's 5 ways to fix it. Obviously, price increase. Look at the terms of trade. Just because we've been doing something for 30 years, if the customer doesn't value it anymore and it's a cost, let's change the terms of trade. So there's ways of fixing it. Typically, when people work on this, they'll see a 2 to 5% lift in profit within 90 days. Are we measuring what matters? I'm a big fan of key performance indicators, but are the things that you're tracking correlating to your success? We got to identify what those leading KPIs are and perform a basic analysis and review which ones really correlate with your results. We also need to stay up to date with industry metrics. For example, not all data is important. So again, I'm a big fan of data dashboards, particularly for salespeople, but every leader in your company should be able to look at a data dashboard that gives them actionable insights. If you're not familiar, I mean, we have leading as well as lagging indicators. A lagging indicator is how much did we sell last month? What was our profit last month? Leading indicator, how many meetings are our salespeople having? How many quotes went out the door? Um, there's also, leading indicators for operations, accounts payable, accounts receivable. Those are the things we need to be really tracking, particularly if we believe the economy is going to be difficult. Lagging indicators can only be controlled by indirect, and they aren't that great of a KPI. It's already happened, right? You want to get a good pulse on your business. Let's establish some really good leading KPIs. As I said, I work a lot with sales and marketing teams. We're tracking how many conversations, how many calls did you make, how many conversations did you have, how many future meetings did you book, how many people showed up for the meeting, how many meetings turned into quotes. Those are things that we've discovered by company that actually turn into an order. One of my manufacturers actually found that if somebody visits their facility, their close rate more than doubles. So that is now something we're tracking. As we work with customers, we invite them to the customer's business and give them a tour. And then voice of customer, it's kind of a passion of mine. It's kind of been like my secret sauce over the years, but I include it now. I mean, I have, I don't know, 14 articles on my website. And I want to ask you a question. Could an outdated assumption about your customers be stalling your growth? The reason I ask that is as I help companies, particularly multi-generational companies, I often have people tell me things like, well, my granddad didn't have a website. Our customers don't use the internet to search. Just a whole bunch of assumptions. I was helping a company in the metals industry, and they said, we are the only person in North America that has this particular process. So yeah, we charge a lot for this. But when we went out and interviewed their customers, we actually found that there were 3 other people in the country now capable of doing that. 10 years ago, what he said was true, but in the last 24 months, that changed. So think about how we have to change our strategy, maybe even change how we go to market as we learn new insights. One of the things I keep hearing, and hopefully this doesn't offend anybody because I wish I would have come up with it, is I don't need sales reps pitch slapping me. If you haven't heard this phrase, what they mean is a sales rep shows up and they immediately start pitching. They don't ask you any questions. They don't even try to build rapport. They assume that because you're in a particular industry, you have a problem that they solve and they start pitching. What people said they need, and no matter who we interview, how many voice of customer research projects our team does, we keep hearing the same thing. I need an industry consultant to help me solve challenges. I don't need a rep. I've already done the research, right? The reason I'm talking to you is I went to your website. I just need help. I need advice. What I value most is somebody with industry insights that can coach me, help me make a good buying decision, not let me go down the wrong road, right? But that's how we have to train our salespeople today. And unfortunately, we have a lot of salespeople behaving badly. So much so that 33% of buyers in the last study said they choose not to engage with a salesperson. They would rather just deal directly with the company. They have enough information, they've done their research, and they really don't want that salesy approach. Another way they phrase it is, I want to have human to human authentic conversations. I don't want to talk to somebody that's using a pitch, reading a script. I want somebody that actually takes the time to understand my business, how I make money, and then help me. And if you do, that's where you're going to see what I call explosive growth. So, question for you, quote for you, I should say. Vern Harnish, he wrote the book Scaling Up. He also wrote a book on Rockefeller habits, and he said, developing a strategy without market insights is criminal. It's criminal. It's malpractice, right? How can we develop a go-to-market strategy without understanding our customers? So if you want to get out there and understand your customers, what are the basics? What do we need to know? Well, number one is, why do they buy from you today? And I'm going to tell you a story of a company I was helping here in a little bit, and it shocked us what we learned, right? Why don't they buy from you? When we ask your salespeople, what percent of business do you have? We often hear, well, we have the majority of the business. But that's simply not what we find when we do the research. You have usually about 25 to 33% of the business. Typically, there's a lot more business to have at some of your key accounts. What's their buying process today? The quickest way for a salesperson to feel salesy and not feel like they're giving you a human to human authentic conversation is to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of their buying process. People have formal buying processes, and the burden is on us to understand where they are. Did they just discover they have a problem and they're trying to find a solution? Have they started looking at people who could solve the solution? Have they picked you as one of the two? Where are they at? Because where they're at will determine how we talk to them. What criteria do they need? Often we find things that we just weren't aware of that they needed. And once we fill that gap, you can see a pretty dramatic increase in your close rate. What are their goals and challenges? I just completed a project for one of my clients, and we were really fascinated how many of their clients really had record-breaking years in 2023. Their pipeline is really strong for 2024, and one of their biggest constraints was labor. And then more important is, are they satisfied? What's your net promoter score? Your net promoter score is basically, are they referring people to you? 90% of my revenue as a consultant is people referring people to me. I try to do some good marketing. I try to put out great content on LinkedIn, but the vast majority of my clients come from referrals. So are your customers referring other people at trade shows and conferences to work with you? And we don't have to guess. I mean, we can do voice of customer research and give you that number. So what about some examples of companies that scaled using customer insights and training? This is the new CEO of Lyft. David came over from Amazon. And what I find fun, and a high five to him, is the first thing he did was he got trained to be a driver. And he started driving passengers around and asking them questions. And what he discovered was female passengers would prefer a female driver. So he's implementing all kinds of new tools and systems to give his customers a better experience. That is going to be his distinctive competence. Now, will people copy him in the future? Probably. But again, that intimate understanding of your customers is so critical. I'm going to date myself. For those of you who remember compact discs back in the day, when they first came out, they were a theft nightmare. 25, 30% theft on a regular basis. I was working for a plastics company called Alpha Enterprises, awesome company, by the way. Our competitors made a sample product. They shipped it to everybody they thought might need a device for securing their inventory. We took a little different approach. We went out and met with music studios. We met with mass merchants. We met with record stores back in the day. We met with grocery stores, bookstores. And what we found was there was actually 3 products people needed. Within 18 months, we sold over 110 million packages at very high margins. And we basically paid off our debt and doubled the company. Why did we do that? How did we do that? We just asked questions. We really wanted to understand why people were doing certain things, what they wanted, what they valued. And the side benefit is, if you go into like a Best Buy or Walmart, you're going to see a device like this somewhere in the store. After we solved their problem with compact discs, they kept coming back to us saying, hey, can you help me with this? Because what they found was, if a device is behind a case with a lock, and chances are, because of labor, there's nobody in the department when you need them, sales drop 70%. But if it's out live, and then you remove the device at checkout, you grow sales. So we brilliantly solved their compact disc problem, and then they started coming to us with other challenges. And that's what happens when you start understanding your customers. I helped a great company out of Arizona called VMI. One of my favorite jobs. They make vehicles so people in wheelchairs can be mobile again. They can either drive or be a passenger, and their revenue was stalled. They just weren't growing as fast as their owners wanted. So I hit the road and I started interviewing a bunch of their dealers, but also people in wheelchairs. And what we found was there's 4 different types of people in wheelchairs. And unfortunately, all our communication was talking as if they were all the same. But I'll never forget, there was a gentleman in Akron, Ohio, when I interviewed him. When my salesperson was in calling on the dealer, trying to increase inventory, I was interviewing people in the service lobby. And he said, you guys aren't all that smart. It got my attention. He said, what you guys need to understand is, people in wheelchairs have about 25% less disposable income than most consumers. And these things are really expensive for us. Why can't you convert used vehicles and then put your ramps on those? It would take, quite a bit of money off the retail price. Well, I took that back to our team. Obviously, we had some brilliant engineers, great purchasing. We started buying fleets of vehicles from rental car companies. And today in that industry, 60 to 70% of sales are used vehicles that were converted. So again, you never know what an insight's going to happen. I remember when we started converting used, we had 1 shift, then we had 2 shifts, then we had 3 shifts. I mean, the business was booming. So the question becomes, how are you going to make it easier to be a customer and harder to be one of your competitors? My advice is, again, let's look back, look at your data, look at your team, look at your leadership team, but intimately understand what your customers are going through today and act on it. I just wrote a couple articles on if you've had the courage to do voice of customer research. We also have to have the courage to act on it, because you're going to have a lot of insights, but markets change pretty rapidly. It might take our team 5 weeks to have 500 to 600 interviews of your customers. Act on it. We want to see you act on it in the first 30 to 60 days, because that's where you're going to see the biggest impact. There's a great book in terms of resources, scaling up. I've been doing this 40 years, and there's all kinds of different methodologies to grow your business. I actually interviewed different methodologies. I've used different methodologies, but I was introduced to scaling up a few years ago. I'm a fan. My whole brand is called No Smoke and Mirrors. Nothing I do is all that fancy. I just want it to work. And what I liked about scaling up is they break it down into 4 decisions: people, strategy, execution, and cash. If you get those 4 things right, you will scale. And this book, I have to warn you, I mean, the author used to be an MIT professor. It's more than a book. It gives you worksheets, it gives you all kinds of things. I mean, I was so sold, I became a scaling up coach. One of the questions that we ask often is, do you have all the processes running without drama? And are you driving industry leading profitability? If you're seeing drama in your business, we need to fix that. It's slowing down your growth. It's hurting your employee engagement and satisfaction. And why aren't you seeing industry leading profitability? Let's get to the root of it and let's fix it. One of the big benefits of book Scaling Up, and then his prior book was Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, is a checklist. And everybody that's attending this is going to get the checklist, but it asks some really good questions that I think would be great conversation starters for your leadership team meetings. Is our team healthy and aligned? Is everybody aligned with the one thing that needs to be accomplished this quarter? Do we have a communication rhythm? And is every facet of the organization has a person assigned with accountability? This just happened yesterday. One of my clients called. The CEO was very frustrated on something that's been lingering problem for about 6 weeks. And the first question I asked was, who's it assigned to? And he started listing all these people. I said, well, who owns it? And that was like an aha moment. We need to make sure that we know who owns each key part of our growth strategy. And we have all kinds of tools to help people do that. Um, Other questions is, can employees articulate key components of our strategy? Not our goals. Most employees can tell us what our goal is, our growth goal, but what's our strategy? How are we going to get there? Who are we going to get there with? Um, so again, you're going to get a copy of this. I encourage you to have a great conversation with your leadership team. Also, if you're interested, you can actually take an online assessment. I really want people to do this now because very quickly it's going to tell you, is there an area in people, strategy, execution, or cash that could be slowing your growth? And the link is right there. Again, you're going to get it, when I send out the follow-ups. But again, we highly encourage you to take this because it could give you a little early warning into 2024. It could give you some insights like, look, I really need to work on my strategy, or wow, I plan to grow 20 to 30% this year. That's going to take a lot of cash because cash is required when you're growing. So again, we've thrown that tool in there for you free. And then there's always somebody. Every time I speak at an event and I talk about all these steps to profitably grow your company, and they pull me aside. Hopefully they don't do it when I'm speaking. That's happened. But Mark, this could be a tremendous waste of time, energy, and people. My goodness, we've never had to work this hard. We've never had to do these things to grow our business. Our business has always grown 15 to 20% year over year. And that's usually the guy I ask, well, how's it doing now? Well, we've had a couple setbacks. We've lost a couple key accounts. The inflation, that's not something we can control. So my answer is this: if you take the steps that I've discussed today, and there's more that you can do, and I can go a lot deeper. If you just do the things we talked about today, you're going to see increased profits. You're going to have a more engaged and focused team. You're going to increase your market share, reduce the cost of sale. You're going to have the right terms of trade for each customer segment. I'm really a big advocate of having A, B, and C customers and aligning how we take care of them based on their opportunity, but also their revenue, because a lot of salespeople have the belief, well, I'm going to treat everybody the same. And sometimes that's just adding costs to the sale process that doesn't need to be there. You're going to improve your sales effectiveness. Just knowing that your team needs help with closing skills and having them take closing training is going to improve their effectiveness. And you're ultimately going to have improved customer satisfaction and experience. I've got some other resources for you. Like I said, I wrote a book, Driving Explosive Growth. For whatever reason, it's selling better in Japan than it is in the United States, which is kind of fun. I have a website. I'm really active on LinkedIn. I hope you guys connect with me. My blog is ranked #1 in the world for fixing sales problems. I just wrote another book. When I wrote the book on driving explosive growth, the chapter people were most interested in was voice of customer. So we wrote another book. And in this book, if you look at the picture, it's supposed to be an iceberg. And what a lot of salespeople do is just look at things above the water, the things that most buyers will tell you. But the burden is on us today to look beneath the water. When you start finding things beneath the water that other salespeople aren't aware of, that's when you start making more sales and at a higher gross margin. I also have 2 new assets. I wrote a book, The Right People, Right Role. For years, we've had hunters and farmers. A hunter is somebody that goes out, they get a new account, and then they move on and get another new account. It's a rare discipline that a lot of salespeople don't have. Farmers are people who have an account and they grow it. And this is a tremendous lot of value to your organization if you have a farmer in the right role. The trick is having them in the right role. But as people accelerated on their digital investments, we see a new role emerging called the fisherman. The fisherman is somebody who's excellent at bringing in and nurturing digital leads. And I talk about that role. I also talk about a role that we don't want you to have, which is the babysitter. Unfortunately, on some teams, we have disengaged salespeople. I did a team 2 years ago that had 350 salespeople, and 20% of the people on the team shouldn't even be in sales. They don't want to sell. They have no drive to sell. They're just basically taking up space. And unfortunately, that particular distributor had plans to hire more salespeople to hit their numbers. And what we ended up doing was moving people to other roles where they could add a lot more value. Um, Purchasing, the warehouse, customer service. So again, it's a resource. And then the other one is sales training reimagined. How do we train people today? And I share 17 ways to keep your people motivated and engaged. So I hope these resources, they're all free. They're on my website. I hope they're useful to you. And I hope that we can connect. So today we talked about your markets, knowing current market trends, making sure we have the right people with the right skills, and really understanding our customers. This isn't something new. It's not something Mark invented, but market leading companies do this. But there's still stuff we need to work on that we didn't talk about today. Your leadership team, making sure that we have trust, communication, having a strategic one-page plan. I can't tell you how important it is to have it on one page. When it's on one page, people look at it. They look at it frequently. Measure what matters. That's that discussion we had briefly on KPIs. And I recommend having them all over the building. Everybody on the team knows our top 10 things that we're tracking. Coach, as I said, we have a lot of different generations coming up through businesses today, and they don't want to be managed. Matter of fact, they'll leave if you try to manage them. So what I recommend is invest in coaching skills. I mean, obviously, we're going to have to manage some people, but how you manage them will be more of a coach and less of a micromanager that might have been the case in the 50s or 60s. And then if you feel one of those trigger events in the next few months, pivot, don't panic. Gather your information as fast as you can and act. Acting even on the information that you have, you're going to create what I call learnings. We're going to act, we're going to do the best that we can. And if we learn new things, we're going to pivot again. The teams that McKinsey studied on that grew 14%. 14% of them grew during a difficult economic time. They grew 9% on average. The one thing they all had in common was they created cross-functional teams and they updated their plans. So I hope this was useful to you. I hope it prepared you should we face some economic uncertainty. And do we have any questions? I'm just wanting to get through this, but also be respectful of your time. We started about 2 minutes late and we're 4 minutes late now. I see some comments. But yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn if you'd like to have other books. There's a lot of books out there that I recommend that are excellent at helping companies grow strategically. And again, thank you for attending today. Everybody's going to receive a PDF of the slides. So if you wanted to hit some of those links, do some self-assessments, that's great. You're going to be able to connect to me on LinkedIn. I try to put something useful out every week. But again, I highly recommend some of the resources. And if you take the steps we discussed today, you could be one of those companies that actually speed past your competitors as the business gets tough. Thanks for attending today.